Here's another question from email. How do interactions like this remain secure?
Yeah, security is difficult, and part of the reason why it's difficult is because when some people say security, what they mean is encryption, because that's the piece that they've heard of, it's the piece that they think about. But the authentication issue of how do you prove who you say you are, and the authorization issue of how do I know that you're allowed to use this system, and how do I make sure that this piece of data that I'm sending hasn't been modified by somebody in the middle. All these kinds of questions make designing really effective security systems hard, but that's sort of the job that we've got. And one of the ways that we attack that is by getting a lot of eyes on the problem. And standards is one of the best ways of doing that. Getting the security folks at the IETF involved, for example, in helping us with ensuring that each one of the different steps that we've got in one of these systems is as secure as we can make it.
Joe, what's the difference between open standards and open source?
Yeah, that's a good question, and people sort of tend to get a little confused between the two because there's a lot of overlap in the two. And so if you did a Venn diagram, there'd be open source and open standards. And so open standards is about how do two things communicate, the bits that go on the wire, typically. How do I take a system from one vendor and have it interoperate with a system from another vendor? Open source is about how do I take a piece of code, maybe one of these systems from one of these places, and make it so that a lot of people can get access to it. A lot of people can see the guts of it, can look at how it works, can propose changes, can actually send changes in, so that the system that you've built is also a conversation. And that's another place where you need to make sure that you know who the people are that are contributing code back and forth. And that comes back to this identity question that we've got.
I want to thank you. We've got loads of questions coming in. Just as a reminder, we're talking to Joe Hildebrand, and we've been discussing XMPP, this open standards, Jabber, and the changing nature of our identities. And here's another question from Twitter. This person wants to know, what are your thoughts on Google Buzz and the concept of real-time conversations and content aggregation in the enterprise?
Mm-hmm. So Buzz is very interesting. They had a couple of, let's say, rough patches in their first day or two. But I think that as a system, it points out this desire that we have to talk with one another, share information with one another, to use the social networks that we have, be it from email in Google's case, or Facebook, or Twitter, or et cetera, to have the tools to process a larger number of relationships. And humans grew up with relatively small bands of people. We process up to about 150 relationships pretty well. Above that, we start to have to really gloss over details, to not have as tight a relationship. One of the things that some of these tools like Buzz and Facebook, et cetera, have given us the ability to do is to keep track of more relationships and at least begin to process them as if they were more meaningful relationships. Whether those relationships will stand the test of time will come to be thought of as the same sort of relationship as a person that you work with side by side every day, for example. I don't know. Again, that's how we think about relationship is also changing. Maybe these more potentially superficial or potentially more invasive relationships that you get online will become what we think of as a relationship.
Ben from Twitter is asking, what is Cisco doing to compete with Google's Wave? This is very much on people's minds right now.
Well, I don't know that we necessarily compete is not necessarily always in Cisco's best interest. So sometimes working with, sometimes collaborating, sometimes interoperating are also possibilities. It's kind of an old industrial kind of thought process to think that we should compete with everything that we see out there. Wave is very interesting. It points to the ability to have much more interactive web content, and we're doing a lot of cool stuff in that area by making Jabber XMPP sorts of streams available within a web browser that allows you to do really interactive, real-time web browsing experiences. We see Wave as one of the sorts of things that you might do across an interactive web channel, specifically co-editing of XML files. I think that is one of the things that you would do if you had this bidirectional stream, but it's not the only thing.
For those of our viewers who may not know, can you define XMPP?
Sure. So XMPP is the Extensible Messaging and Presence Protocol. It's a system for routing chunks of data across the internet, where the addresses that are on these chunks of data are not IP addresses or physical names of machines or anything like that. Instead, they're the names of people or the names of services or the names of devices. So what we're doing is routing on the identities of these endpoints. Who am I trying to send this to? And the system figures out, how do I get that from here to there? So what that's been used for is instant messaging. I want to send you an IM. Or presence. So are you there? How are you there? Are you available? Are you interruptible? Can I find you? So those kinds of things are the first systems that have been built on top of XMPP, but there have been a lot of other really cool things done with this identity-based routing system.
Very cool. Thank you again, everybody. We're getting tons of questions. Here's one from Andres from Twitter. He wants to know, what's the biggest challenge for you bringing a social media tool, Web 2.0, inside Enterprise 2.0 at Cisco?
That's an interesting question. So one of the things that we've seen is that deploying some of these tools at scale is difficult. And the traditional way of selling enterprise-class software, where I give you a piece of software, you run it on your machines, and I sell you a bunch of people who come in and configure it and make it work for your system. People want these things to be up and running a lot faster than that, and they want it to be a lot easier. And so software as a service is one of the approaches that we're taking to that. We'll offer these sorts of systems pre-hosted in a secure manner so that we can have you up and running in hours rather than months. And that I think is one of the things that we're doing to sort of look at this problem. Of course, when you do that, this is a relatively new way of hosting systems that are important to enterprises. And so the information security people at that enterprise will often have opinions about the right way to do that. And so we've worked with a lot of those people to try and ensure that the systems that we offer meet their needs. From everything is in the cloud as software as a service, or some pieces of that are running on-premise, or the entire system is running on-premise. And being able to scale on that continuum is one of the things that we're really starting to make some progress at.
As a reminder to those of you who may have just tuned in or didn't tune in from the beginning, we're talking with Joe Hildebrand. This is Talk2Cisco. Here is a question from email. With email, IM, phone calls, tweets, and more, we're overloaded with information. That's for sure. How are people evolving to this new world?
Well, I'd like to think that our tooling is going to have to evolve. There's a limit to how far we can probably push normal human nature. We can process some small number of streams of information in parallel, and maybe it's as high as 6 or 7 or 8 for the people who are really good at it. But going to 20 is just pretty much physically right out at the moment. And so our tooling really needs to evolve to help us find the stuff that we're really interested in. Some of that is looking at the attention of the people who are in our social circles. So the people who I trust have seen this particular thing and find it interesting. So that attention data is useful for trying to ferret out the bits that are most important to me. But I also have to do my own curation. So the curation is sort of this term from the museum industry, right? I curate an exhibit. And it's all about learning about that one topic and finding out everything I can about it and distilling down the pieces that are the most interesting to others. And so having spots of expertise in some of these smaller pieces of a problem that I can then go to figure out the things that are most interesting about that. So some of these are just tooling changes. Some of them are, how do we incent people to be curators? How do we reward them for that work? And so there's sort of business questions here. There's philosophical questions. There are tooling questions as well.